This is a story, called The Snowman. Whips of crisply frozen pellets struck against the frost-framed window while Jerson watched. He cringed when they struck as though they might break through and lash him. In the whited night blue of winter he watched wind wisping around the swing set, around the evergreens, and around that snowman. The wet snow that had aided in its construction now hardened and resisted the scoring of ice crystals. They merely tickled its segmented body as they detoured around it. He began reciting from memory a poem he'd read a long time ago. He must have a mind of winter, and have been cold a long, long time, to stand there and hate me. Jesse looked up from the game he was playing on his phone. He'd assumed Grandpa was just enjoying the snow drifts. Old people like looking at weather phenomena and stuff. Especially after dinner. Though he wasn't sure where he'd gotten that from, he was convinced of its veracity. The bitterness in his grandfather's voice did not cohere with this assumption. Jess's mother had also looked up from her Instagram. She noticed her father had been looking out the window for some time. He'd usually complain when he visited each Christmas that they lived in Bumfuck, Egypt with more snow. And she'd correct him. "No, it's Bumfuck, Ohio." "Dad, who you talking to?" she asked. "That snowman's bad," he said. "I built that just yesterday," Jesse exclaimed, thinking his artistic ability was being criticized. "It transubstantiated," Jerson said. The fire roared quietly on the television, where the volume was set to a reasonable 4 notches. Heat gushed into the room from the floor vents. "What's that mean, Grandpa?" Jesse asked. "It's alive," Jerson said. "I saw it move. I don't know how it does it, seeing as how it doesn't have any musculature or nerves. Not clear what powers it has. I know it has some." "Are you feeling okay, Dad?" Shelley asked. Jesse turned off his game completely and stood. He was looking back and forth from his mother and grandfather. He wanted her to make things normal again. "Dad," she pressed, "do you feel like you're having a stroke, maybe? You're saying strange things." "Mom," Jesse said, "can you imagine the loneliness?" he asked. "Out there in the cold, under the night sky. Facing in, it can see us in the warmth of the fireplace. It can see us in the warmth of our family. It can see the orange hues and the pinks of our skin and the love. Warmth it can never have. Warmth is death for the snowman. Cold is worse than death. Isolation, emptiness, to be melted or destroyed in a few friendless days. That snowman is the emptiest thing in the universe." "What's happening to Grandpa?" Jesse asked. Shelley stood next to her father at the window. The powdery snow was twirling in pretty little cyclones and making drifts. The most beautiful weather for a Christmas Eve night. The snowman was the same one Jesse built. It hadn't mysteriously turned its head, grew, or sprouted arms. It was just a snowman. And as far as she could see, her dad was just her dad. "That thing means to destroy us," Jerson said, turning on her. "Yet I feel sorry for it." "Let's get you to bed," Shelley suggested. "Okay." Jerson shuffled past her to the coffee table. He walked around it at a brisk pace again and again, bobbing sometimes, making gestures with his hands other times. "Dad, you're scaring me. This is a warmth spell," he gasped. "Sacred dance. Gotta create a warmth barrier to keep it out." Shelley's husband Oscar came in from the back door. He'd been shoveling an area out for the dog to do her business without getting caked in snow. "Gerson's dancing?" he asked. "Something's wrong with him," she said. "Jesse, why don't you go to your room for a bit, bud?" Oscar said. Jesse was concerned for his grandfather but glad to be excused. He felt he was seeing what he shouldn't. On his way to his room, he glanced out the window. The snowman stood plainly amidst the drifts in the yard. Like most children, Jesse sometimes imbued objects with personhood. After creating it, he'd welcomed the snowman into the world and even named it Ranger. He'd felt guilty about leaving Ranger out in the cold, but Ranger was made of snow so he shouldn't mind too much. He knew, of course, it was just some snow he'd packed together. Though he understood little, Jesse sat on his bed with his bedroom door open so he could hear what was happening. "Oscar," Jerson said, "don't go out there again." Breathing heavily from his dance, he returned to the window. "Look at this," he said, "the swing on the swing set." See how it's moving? That's against the direction of the wind. All the branches are moving in the opposite direction. The snowman is doing that. It's taking control of physical reality around it. Jerson, Jesse just made that snowman today, he said. Yesterday, Shelley corrected. Fine, yesterday. It's just a bunch of snow. Frozen water. Now settle down, 'cause you're freaking your family out. Destroy it, Jerson said. Please. Come on, man, Oscar said. Maybe I'm having an episode. Humor me. Shelley noticed the crack in her son's door and interceded. I won't have it, she said. Nobody touches that snowman. As she said it, Shelley felt a strangely powerful urge to protect the snowman that had gone beyond her original intent. Oscar looked intently at the snowman. Its lopsided smile a mosaic of black mulch. Jesse had dug at eye sockets in an attempt at realism, then popped an acorn in each one. The acorns gave it a silly, tiny-eyed stare. Its branch arms stood firm against the wind though the snow around it drifted like powder. It was a typically ugly child sculpture of the human being reduced to 3 concentric circles. Wouldn't it bother you, Jerson asked, if that was actually me out there in that snowman and me in here was actually the snowman Jesse made yesterday because it swapped our minds? And I've been freaking you out about the snowman so you'd go destroy it so we could never swap back, because I don't want to be a snowman, I want to live. Would that not bother you? Well, I changed my mind. Let him be. Let him be. Have you been in the sauce? Oscar asked. I'm not sure why I'm saying these things, he said. Not used to all this hardware. Shelley came back from the kitchen with a hot beverage she insisted her father drink. To her relief he drank it without a fuss. She'd crushed 2 sleeping pills into it. Thanks, he said, returning to the window. Shelley gestured for Oscar to relax, gestured what she'd done. They waited for Jerson to wobble at his post. They didn't have to wait long. In his barely lucid state, they had no trouble escorting him to the guest room where they let him sleep. Once the stress of the situation was over, once Oscar had gone to put the dog out, once she was sure she was alone, Shelley cried. I'm sorry, Dad, she said. With a deep breath and wiped eyes, she pulled herself up to talk to Jesse. She found him anxiously sitting on his bed hugging an old pillow shaped like Iron Man. Grandpa's gonna be okay, she said. Sometimes, when you get older, you just get confused, okay? It's called dementia. If I didn't make Ranger, he wouldn't have got confused, Jesse said before bursting into tears. Shelley comforted the boy. Though they only saw each other a few times a year, Jesse spent every moment with his grandfather during visits. She didn't know what they talked about all that time, but they were inseparable. It's not your fault, she said. He's sad. Mrs. Grandma. Jesse finally fell asleep between sobs. He woke up a few hours later. The lights were off. Even the Christmas tree was unplugged. His clock showed 3:12. The weak LED hall lights backlit the figure heavy breathing in his doorway. Jesse curled up against his headboard, unable to scream. The figure stepped into the room. It scrunched down to the floor to crawl along his bed. I want to feel good feels again, his grandfather whispered to him once he'd reached the headboard. Grandpa, Jesse gasped. Remember when you made me? He asked. Scooping loose, damp ice crystals into your digits and packing us into a coherence and adding more and more until we had achieved a volume fitting for a segment of the whole. It was good. Is it true you have dementia? Jesse asked. Jesse wiped some tears from his eyes. His grandfather paid no heed. I remember the cold vacuousness of elementary frigid particles. Spread out everywhere with no real awareness, just being there, to fall, blow, melt, be trod upon, compressed, crunched, softened, hardened. Then those warm, gloved hands moved by electrical signals and hot, pumping blood pressing me together, forcing me into a shape. Packing us into coherence. Packing us. More and more. Although painful, it was also pleasing. My awareness grew with each compact volume added to my body. Packing us. I was aware of your movements and intent as you walked around the first ball of my being and began preparing my second segment. Scooping us. Packing and densing. I could feel my interior hardening as the densely packed oh hey, it's okay, I won't hurt you, Jesse, you made me. Jesse had backed away to the corner of the bed, holding his Iron Man pillow for protection. Despite understanding little of it, the tittering, fixated speech of his grandfather had stricken him with terror. "Please leave me alone," he said. "I don't know why you're telling me these things." "No, no, no," his grandfather said, "I'm telling you these things because I'm overflowing with feelings and words and I need to express them or I'll burst. I've never had this before and I have no one else I can tell." "You made me." "I didn't. You're my grandpa. Grandpa's out there in the cold, Jesse," he said. "Grandpa's all alone, Jesse. He's feeling the things I was feeling. The emptiness. The fear of melting. The worst thing in the world is to melt, Jesse. I don't have to fear melting anymore. I'm solid at room temperature. Humans are solid at most temperatures. It's a good thing. Promise me you'll never melt, Jesse. I could show you and melt your dog." "It's bad." Jesse sobbed into the pillow. Iron Man did nothing but absorb his tears. "My awareness spread out across the snow around me back then and I could feel it when we melted in some creature's mouth and slid down the gullet into the intestines and absorbed into the bloodstream. Then consciousness faded. No more. Your grandfather will melt. I feel warmth and blood and excretory functions and itches. I liked it when you brushed the loose snow off my spheroid surface ice. I liked how your gloves sanded me down brushing against my densely packed abdomen and thorax. I'll go get your gloves and we can do that now." "No," Jesse shouted, stopping his grandfather in his tracks. "Why?" "I don't want to," Jesse shouted back. "Rub me." Jesse darted out of bed and ran past his grandfather. He accidentally knocked the old man over. He didn't stop. Jesse grabbed his coat from the closet, quickly pulled on his boots, then went outdoors. Ranger stood in the snow right where he had been left. Jesse hid behind him. He begged the snowman for help. By some unknown means Jerson could comprehend his situation as a snowman. His awareness was something other than his human awareness. It was not based on nerve endings, eyesight, hearing. It was a general awareness circumscribing his volume. Though he was losing his sense of a unified organism, he retained his awareness of who he had been. With that came a keen urge to resolve the boy's troubles. Yet he had no agency in the physical world to do so. He struggled to produce some effect. The swing set moved and some fir needles fell. Whether he had done it, he couldn't be certain. He felt profoundly helpless and unable even to express the shame of his impotence. He sensed, again by some means he did not know, the warmth of the household before him and ineffectually urged Jesse to go to it. He sensed some being inhabiting his old flesh observing him with as much confusion as resentment. He sensed his old flesh in horrible pain as its hip had broken. Humans melt in different ways, he thought, though he bore the snowman no ill will. He accepted it was how things would go. How things would go, as things made their presence felt. As the beings that do all the eating and shitting became insensate and replaced by the structures they build. The age of things is on its way. He wanted to hug his grandson one last time, tell him it would all work itself out, just enjoy it while he could. He tried, in fact, to will his little stick arms to move and let his grandson know he's loved. Instead, his head rolled off and broke into two pieces. The holidays can be a lonely, even depressing time for many people. Especially when jerks write depressing Christmas stories like this one. Take care of yourselves. If you're alone, don't be. Reach out to someone. Call an old friend. Go volunteer at a shelter. Donate blood. Take a stroll through Walmart and smile at strangers. If any of those feel like a lot, you can even just tell us, "Hi, here." Although suicide doesn't go up during the holidays, that's a myth. If you have been thinking of harming yourself, national counseling lines are available in many countries. Find yours if you can and call it. Don't deprive the world of you. It'd be a worse place for it. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Subscribe and please like. Thanks for tuning in and listening.